The numbers are here.
Hey everyone, my name is Scruffy. Consider this video today as feedback for Blizzard. An advocate for buffs to certain tanks, not nerfs to the top ones, because to be honest, the strongest tanks feel really good to play. Coming hot out of the alpha for the War Within, we finally got some damage numbers. This video today is a follow-up to the recent one about the gameplay of all tank hero classes. We finally got some data and can present you today a damage overview for all tanks. If you're more interested in my personal opinion, how these classes play and feel, make sure to check that video out. Anyways, just a quick shout out to myself and my Twitch stream, but also to the boys and girls on your MMO for letting us write and prepare all guides for the War Within. We are currently preparing dungeon guides for all 8 dungeons from the War Within Season 1 and hope that these are up as soon as the public beta is playable for all players that get an invite or pre-order the Epic Edition. And without further ado, let me show you our testing setup. We ran City of Threats, one of the first dungeons in the War Within Season 1. We gave all 6 different tank classes the same equipment and chance. The reason for enchants is that we wanted to include the Death Knight rune weapon, so it would be just fair if other tanks have a regular enchant as well. We used Curse Haste for our rings. This enchant increases our haste, but reduces our versatility. Most tanks and their standard gear did not have any versatility on it. This caused us to not lose more versatility below 0 and still grant us the most amount of haste. Otherwise, we did not use any group buffs, potions or consumables. While in the dungeon, we ran a certain trash pack with 4 mobs to test out the cleave damage and survivability, and then we killed the first boss. The first boss does not require much coordination and is rather considered a patchwork fight. We also tested these pulls solo and not in a group. This caused us to also use abilities in between that heal us up, as you would probably do in a real scenario. This shall rather be a real test than a simulation. Our talents were mostly similar to the ones currently used in Dragonflight Season 4. For all talent trees that have seen some changes in the War Within, we accordingly adjusted them, and whenever needed, we respec'd into the talents that were required to play a specific hero class, but more to them later. We did not change talents throughout the dungeon and remained on a more Mythic Plus focused talent tree. And at last, the scaling buff implemented by Blizzard. Our gear is currently 538 in dungeons, and our level is scaled up to level 80, starting today with the Warrior. In our first run, we used similar talents as currently on the live retail servers. The general tree has seen some updates, and we targeted our talent choice on the most damage and survivability possible. We also used AoE talents because you would probably skill those in Mythic Plus anyway, instead of focusing on single target damage. Without any hero talents, the Warrior had some struggle on the first test ball, with the mobs consisting of 2 casters and 2 tank busters, giving us a good picture for physical and magical damage taken. The first boss itself took forever. Almost 8 minutes it took to defeat the first boss, who, once again, does not require playing any mechanics and is more or less just a trading dummy. In our second test run, it's time for the Zappy Mountain Tane. Right off the bat, this felt insanely better. We suddenly cut down the time to kill our pack consisting of 4 mobs in literally half the time. This was the moment that I realized that this is going to be doing great damage. Coming to the boss, it wasn't quite half the time, but still significantly faster. Survivability was a little better, but this comes from several interactions between hero talents and spec talents that I don't want to cover necessarily today. Check out the previous video where we talk about the hero talents more in detail. And now to our third run, the Colossus Warrior. Right at the start, the first pack did feel a bit slower, despite Demolish being such a nice button to press, dealing almost 1,000,000 damage per use. The boss itself took also longer than Mountain Tane, but surely not as long as our baseline reading without any hero talents. These kill times gave me already a good idea about their damage performance. And here we go, there are the numbers. All logs will be linked in the video description if any one of you guys want to dig a little bit deeper into certain damage numbers. During the trash mobs, Mountain Tane clearly took the lead over the Colossus Warrior, but somehow I felt that overall damage is quite low. I tried to use more revenges while still keeping my uptime on Ignore Pain and Shield Block, as I actually needed the defenses during these mobs. On the boss, the Mountain Tane once again clearly takes the lead over the other ones as well. Surely, I can't really tell how this is going to be with tier set later on, but for now, I'm quite happy to see these numbers. Colossus Warrior have more passive damage mitigation, so Mountain Tane should be in the lead, giving Warriors a more offensive hero spec, and the Colossus one as a more defensive one. Let's put the Warrior up against the Druid. For the Druid, we start with our baseline and have no hero talents. The class tree is similar to the currently used one on live servers, despite the changes in the general tree. We still choose the same talents for the Guardian tree, including Race and Urzok's Fury talent. For me, after playing so much Guardian Druid on live servers, it felt totally normal. The trash mobs with 2 casters are just nasty, because Druids just don't like magic damage, and otherwise we kept spamming Thrash, Race, and Ironfur. The boss itself also stood no chance, but it already felt significantly faster than a Warrior baseline reading. The second run was the Druid of the Claw. This one required significant changes in our general tree. Because we are shapeshifting from bear to cat form, we needed Rip and Rake, but also fluid forms to not trigger any global cooldowns anymore when we want to shapeshift. First pack was fairly tricky. In our baseline run, we already struggled a bit, especially when the enemies used their stuns on you, but shapeshift shapeshifting into cat form was for 4 mobs not a big deal. On the boss, where I really thought that Druid of the Claw really shines, the Druid tank was not much faster than the baseline reading. More to this as soon as we look into the damage numbers. The third test run was the Elun's Chosen, which is already a big favorite by many tank players and other content creators. The first pack was just annihilated. They stood no chance and melted pretty quick. Also, it was fairly easy to survive. I did not skill Urzok's Fury this time, which would be an insane combo with the hero talents, but the arcane damage here was already enough. And now I thought the boss would be definitely taking longer than the Druid of the Claw, but no, it was even quicker. So let's look into it. Druid of the Claw's Ravage did not convince an AoE much over the baseline reading. It does not proc all the time, but still granted a significant damage bonus. Sadly, rip and rake damage is incredibly low. I would have actually expected these to do way more damage, especially during the boss. If you compare the boss damage to Elun's Chosen, there's no way for the Druid of the Claw to exist in the current way it is. I really like the idea of shapeshifting, as I stated in our gameplay test for the hero classes, but it's often very scary, not advisable in larger pools, and in single target, the damage does not convince. Currently on live servers, you already play with Galactic Guardian in single target, so I shouldn't have been so surprised by its performance. As a feedback, buff the damage of Rip and Rake for Guardian Druids, and we should be Gucci. The Guardian Druid stomps the current state of warrior tanks by a mile, regarding the damage output and survivability. Coming now to the Paladin. In our baseline run, Paladin tanks felt the most squishy for now, compared to the warrior and druid. A lot of holy power had to be spent on Word of Glory to keep us alive during this pull. As a Templar Paladin, we already felt the power of Hammer of Light. It's quite annoying to use sometimes because it costs 5 holy power and takes away another global cooldown, but the time to kill this pack was quite quick. In the third run, I really had high hopes for the Lightsmith Paladin. It was very important to me personally, as a big fan of Paladin tanks supporting the group with their utility cooldowns, that this hero class is going to be faster and better than the Templar, even if it's just passive buffs. In this pull, the Holy Armament heals us even so much that we almost didn't need to use any healing spells. Yoda TV has already been talking in the past about the Lightsmith Paladin to have an insane output, and I might be able to keep on yapping while the real-time footage of this pack is played. Let's look into the numbers for the AoE pack. The Lightsmith Paladin seems little broken. Dude, what the fuck is this chart? Like, what the fuck happened here? Okay, the important note on the Lightsmith Paladin is that the output just on yourself is already insane. But what is not included in Warcraft logs and in our testings is the potential damage gain when giving the same buff to one or sometimes even more players. The hero talents guarantee at least one additional player to receive the same buff. This is why the chart here includes 2 different numbers and could go even further if we would calculate 2 players to have the buff up. Let's look into the boss. In our baseline test, everything seemed fairly normal. Like again, what was that? Dude. In the second run as a Templar Paladin, the damage already felt significantly better than the baseline, but this time, the Lightsmith Paladin did not feel much faster in our third run. It definitely felt faster during the trash mobs. Let's talk about boss numbers. The Lightsmith did not convince here. The Sacred Weapon did only do around 20% of our damage, while it was 40% of our damage in AoE. Potentially here, there's another 27,000 DPS gain for the guaranteed second player that gained a Sacred Weapon buff as well, and maybe even more players depending on your procs. Overall, the Paladin currently is just broken. So I put them currently on top of the charts, but keep in mind that these numbers seem very irritating. But to be fair, they happen to appear very consistent. The survivability gain of the other buff is also very strong, making your Paladin tank the next augmentation evoker. Next on my list is the Demon Hunter. In the current season, it's the king of tanking. Demon Hunter tanks are not just the tankiest tanks currently, but also offer an insane amount of utility with all their sigils. It felt quite regular in our first run. Surely, I don't have my UI on alpha servers, so I'm failing a few interrupts here and there during the trash mobs, but otherwise, it's the same old, same old. In our second run, we tested the Aldraki Reaver Demon Hunter. In my gameplay test, I already spoke about it being a not so nice to play hero class. Every 20 soul fragments, we get an empowered Froglaive, and without a lot of haste or tier set, this felt quite bad during the test polls of the 4 mobs, as well as during the boss. Feldscarred Demon Hunter tanks were not testable in my last video, but I added a note in the comments on that video. Basically, every time we enter a demon form, we get to use several abilities that will cause us to deal additional damage. Both hero talents do restrict the Demon Hunter tanks to press a certain choreography of abilities, which I don't really like. Let's hope it does a lot of damage therefore. Looking into the trash pack pool, Demon Hunter tanks were already quite strong in AoE, especially whenever we tested with all cooldowns ready, like Elysian Decree. Demon Surge for the Feldscarred DH did not really convince over the Froglaive hero class, but they're pretty close to each other. During the boss though, the Feldscarred Demon Hunter felt much better. The Adraki Reaver's strongest point is a 5-second damage buff on the enemy, which is quite small, missing a lot of haste to get a lot of damage out during this time. Felsguard was just a regular tank with some added bonus every time you enter Demon form. Overall, to the other tanks, Demon Hunters can claim both hero talents to be over the warrior now, ranking the current top 3 and 4, but nowhere near Elun's chosen Guardian Druid, and surely not the Paladin tank. Paladin tanks were close behind the Demon Hunters in Dragonflight Season 3, just in the sense of utility, and looking into our written guides on your MMO, we can already see that interrupts like a Knockhood offensive will not be needed anymore in the War Within. Coming to the Death Knight now. Death Knights know from Dragonflight how damage starved they are. According to Zimcraft, they're currently ranking the lowest tanks in single target damage, and their AoE is not the greatest either. Looking into the trash moves first. The DK had no issue staying alive, while just doing its regular rotation, spending rune power on Deathstrike. I will have to spoiler right now, because the Sanlean DK was currently praised as the strongest tank due to its almost permanent 26% passive haste increase. It's great, and oh boy, Vampiric Strike and the idea of a super sturdy tank is nice. Sanlean Death Knights do not struggle whatsoever with self-heal, even less than before. But did it really prove that good in damage? The only way for Deathbringer to be stronger is by raw numbers. So let's have a look. Vampiric Strike will replace Hard Strike, and the biggest damage gainer is the Blood Beast, which explodes, but it is a random proc. So I'm pretty okay with the average proc that we gotten here. But what about the Deathbringer? Looking into the damage breakdown, we see multiple effects caused by the Deathbringer hero talents, as well as Blood Plague going absolutely nuts. Due to the hero talents, Blood Plague deals damage double as fast and even has a chance to deal 30% more damage. On the boss, all Death Knights had no issue with the boss whatsoever. But I never really dared just standing in the void zone of the boss that should be avoided, except for the Sanlean. This hero class offers way too much defense, justifying why so many people are currently having their eyes on it, but it does not convince in damage again. Deathbringer has just way too much output over the Sanlean. Many people were aware that Sanlean could only be balanced if it was almost raw defensive than offensive. A permanent Bloodlust for Sanlean sounds super cool, but looking at Zimcraft again for the current Season 4 in Dragonflight, we see DK is currently in the bottom. So 30% haste of 0 damage is still 0 damage. But at least for me, this is perfect. If you want to be the invincible tank that solo tanks a lot of raid bosses, for example, Sanlean is just for you. I really like the animations of Deathbringer. The Frost Scythe looks really cool, and overall, if we compare it to the other tanks, the Blood DK can rank itself in the current top 3 of all other tanks. Surely, it's the early alpha, things will change, but before DKs get nerfed, we have 2 other candidates that come first. So Death Knights, be excited. Okay, let's have a talk about Monk. In my first test run on stream, I couldn't kill a single thing. The issue with Monk is that Monk is just really bad in our test setup. The only tank that does not want haste, and the self-sustain is usually traded against damage. In our tests, we put all tanks up to each other by how much damage they do, while also keeping themselves alive. I just couldn't get good damage numbers while also keeping myself alive. This would involve a lot of self-heal with Vivify, stunning mobs, and Ring of Piecing them away to buy myself some time to refresh my cooldowns. Anyways, while editing this video, I really didn't want to have another tank video for an expansion on my YouTube channel where I'm getting fucked as a monk, because for all people that don't know, for the Dragonflight beta I earned a lot of hate comments for not liking monk tanks back then. But yeah, where have they been in Dragonflight then if I was so wrong? So I ran a second test off stream, and sadly I don't have any footage for that, but of course the logs for my second test are also linked in the video description. All I can tell is that monk tanks are very difficult to play in our test setup without a healer backing me up to blast the most damage I could. Let's already talk about damage. Shadowpan Monk is... no. Looking into the damage breakdown, you might think that Warcraft logs is not tracking the flurry strikes correctly, but oh boy, they do. The Master of Harmony Monk is way more tanky with a second charge of Celestial Brew, and its damage is very good actually. During the trash, I had to Touch of Death an enemy instantly just so I could even survive in our test setup, but hey, using Touch of Death is fair, it's part of the monk. During the boss, the Wisdom of the Whale buff for Shadowpan also proc only once during the whole boss fight, proving me right from my last video. 400 energy is too much to proc flurry strikes. This is the equivalent of 16 spinning crane kicks, and now suddenly the haste that we got on our monk in our test setup made it even better for that, because it gave us faster energy regen. The Master of Harmony is a bit more than 20% damage increase over baseline. But anyways, the monk data right here is not as accurate, because you probably will play with a healer in your group later on. We just put the monk through a very nasty test that was just better for other tanks and pretty bad for the monk. As a final feedback, it is super early into the alpha, and I hope that people will use this video right here more as a feedback video than a real damage adjustment for all tanks. If you ask me what should happen to the tanks, make sure we're balancing the Lightsmith Paladin tank. Otherwise, we're gonna have another hated spec like Augmentation Evokers. Elun's Chosen is fine, and I do not think that the arcane damage healing should be nerfed. Rather, instead, all other tanks should be buffed, so they're coming close to this as well as the Deathbringer DK does. Deathbringer, in my opinion, is totally fine as it is. It should be probably the baseline of what other tanks should orient themselves in damage. Both Demon Hunter specs just not feel good. But for feedback, Aldraki Reaver should proc faster than 20 soul fragments, and Demon Surge for the Felskard should do a little bit more damage. Mountain Tane was just recently nerfed just before we did this video, and we should revert that again. For the Templar Paladin, buff the damage of Hammer of Light, and please also remove the holy power cost of it. It is just very clunky to play. Lane DKs are fine as are. They are super tanky, and probably they're gonna be scaling better throughout the expansion with their current haste. For the Druid of the Claw, Blizzard should make sure that Rip and Rake does similar OP damage as it does for the Resto Druid. If Blizzard wants us to go into cat form, then it should be actually meaningful and not feel like we're just using a worse ability than just staying in bear form and using Race. Colossus Warrior should do less than the Mountain Tane just because they have more defensive, but in our damage test it seemed a little bit too low. For the Monks, the Master of Harmony is fine. It scales with the damage output that you do, and it will be probably better throughout the expansion. Flurry Strikes just doesn't work as is, it does too low damage and it mostly never procs.